I thought I'd run through with you a guide to which type of pencil to use and for what effects, and then run through some basic drawing or shading techniques with you. Now, when you're in an art shop, you're confronted with a huge variety of sketching pencils, and often people don't know what to choose. They go from 9H, 9B, 6B, 2B, 4H, HB, F. What does it all mean, and which is the best for you? Well, traditionally pencils are made of graphite. It was dug up from the ground, wrapped around with wool, and you'd get your graphite pencil. Then in the 1700s, Mr. Conte over in France decided he could make different hardnesses and softness of pencil by adding clay with the graphite. The more clay you add, the harder the pencil. The less clay, the softer the pencil. Now, with pencils, you've got the HB pencil, which is probably what you've used when you're at school. It's got an equal amount of clay and graphite in it. Now, the H stands for the clay, or the hardness, and the B for the softness. So the higher the number of H, the harder the pencil. The higher the number of B, the softer the pencil. Which do you use for sketching? Well, obviously, the softer pencils work much better than the harder ones, as you can get more tonal value in it. This 2H pencil here, if I just run through, it's quite scratchy. Can you hear that? You can get some variation by taking the pressure on or off, but you can't get a lot of depth. Now, if I do the same thing with a 2B, start off light, add more pressure, and take the pressure off again. You can see you can get a lot more depth in there. Why are the H's there? Well, a lot of people that study graphics or engineering or want technical drawing need to use the H pencils because it doesn't blunt. Because they're so hard, you can keep a good point on the pencil. Now, this 9H, I don't think I've ever sharpened it. It's very scratchy. Can you hear that? And that's because there's a lot of clay in it. It's still useful. As I say, never blunts or takes a long time to blunt. So you can get a lot more precise, straight, thin lines, an even distribution of lines, so it won't ever vary. Whereas the 9B is very soft. And that blunts as soon as you place it down. So if you wanted fine detail, you'd be forever sharpening this to a point after a couple of strokes, just to get the idea. There are different sides of pencils that you can use. You've got a full graphite stick, which is basically graphite in a grade of a 2B, 4B and so on, just wrapped with paint, and that gives you more ability to cover a larger area faster, because you can peel a bit of the paint off and use a large chunk of it. When sketching, the 2B is probably the best one to start with, as it's variable enough to get lights and darks, but it can also be rubbed out, whereas the 9B is a lot trickier to rub out. So for the majority of this, I'll be using a 2B pencil. The first technique that you can use is just known as hatching. The closer the lines are together, the darker it is, or appears to be darker. The further away they are, it appears to be lighter. So if we were doing a mountain, I could use hatching to give a good directional appearance of the gradient of the mountain. And if I did it slightly darker, it would make it look more three-dimensional, that there's a point coming in. So that's hatching. You've then got cross-hatching, which is basically the same. You start off with a hatch, but then you cross over in the opposite direction, and you can keep overlaying it to get the desired thickness or depth that you want. For example, if I draw a very quick cube, and we want to shade it, I could just use hatching for the top very lightly, cross hatching for this side, so we'll hatch in one direction and cross hatch in the other, and then for this one I'll cross hatch 2 or 3 or 4 times to make it look darker. So you're basically filling it in, and each time you go over. It's often used a lot in illustration work, cross-hatching. So you can see we've got 1, 2, 3 different surfaces all reacting with the light differently. So this is our darker area of the cube. So we've got hatching and cross-hatching. You've then got bracelet shading. Now bracelet shading is curved form of crosshatch. Now if we were painting or sketching a sphere and we just did crosshatch or hatching technique to make it look spherical or shaded, it doesn't look very rounded. Whereas if we curve with a bracelet shade, instantly it looks more rounded. You've also got Pointillism, which is the dotty one. Very noisy, but useful. The closer your dots are together, the darker it looks. The further apart your dots are, the paler it looks. Brilliant for gravel, beach scenes, pathways, drives, bricks and stone. Another good tip that you can use is if you use the lid off a biro. It's hard and blunt. Now if I were wanting to paint, I don't know, or draw a light silver birch bark in the distance, I'd have to almost draw around it to give me the effect that I want to shade around it to keep the white of the paper there. However, if I use this lid to press in and push down, and then come with my graphite stick over the top, can you see the outline of the tree remains? Whereas if I did the same tree darker, gives me a totally different effect. So by indenting the paper, you can create really interesting designs or fence posts. The harder you press, the more contrast there is. For example, if we were doing reflections, I'd draw a fence post here just sticking out of the water, and I'll use my biro lid come in now with my water and just add a little bit of reflection with a broken line. You can see we've got ripples, all done by indenting the paper and then brushing over it. Now with that, if you noticed, I used the edge of this whole side of the pencil, so it gives a larger area. If I were using the point, it wouldn't work as well. So that's just a few basic tips with your pencil to give you an idea of how you can get a few extra shading or depth or interesting techniques into your drawing.